Welcome to my channel where we question everything. Today's topic is military affairs, and the heading is the withdrawal of Russian forces from Kherson. Is the Russian military blunder. Now, I can hear Andrei Matayanov and his words always, it says it's a tactical and operational and strategic doctrines that has to be considered and so forth and so forth. And basically nobody really knows what's going on. Might be a small withdrawal and it's a strategic, it's not that important, and etc., etc., etc. And again, an article of yesterday by Larry Johnson also stated that, yes, it's not about occupying land and so on, and that this withdrawal from Kherson makes a lot of sense, and that the Russians are looking after their people and the civilians' lives, and etc., 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 etc. But now, I cannot agree with all these statements. From my side of the view, and like I said many times, I'm sitting in South Africa, and I look at the military situation in Ukraine. Yes, if you want to look at the withdrawal from Russian troops from the Kherson area as a single event, and you look at it from a zoomed-in view, and yes, it makes all sense. Protecting the lives of the soldiers, protecting the lives of civilians, that's all valid strategies and reasons, and it's a good principle, and you can always retreat and fight another day. But unfortunately, just as we always stated, the war in Ukraine hasn't started on the 24th of February. It started 8 years ago. The same you have to say in the same method. Yes, the war has started on the 24th of February, and we're now 9 months later. And you have to consider what has happened in between. You cannot look at this withdrawal from Russian troops as an isolated incident, and therefore you can give a thumbs up and pop your uncle, and everything is hunky-dory. No, it isn't. Now, my friend and I, yesterday we had a discussion. I would like to say argument, but that's, like I always said, it's a strong word, so call it an argumentative discussion. About something else, but we ended at the end of the day talking about the initial Kiev, the Russian advance to Kiev, and a 40-mile-long armored column that got sort of stuck at a certain place on the road for about a week. And there was a lot of speculations on why this column has gotten stuck. And the pro-Western pundits said, oh yeah, the bad logistics, run out of diesel, etc., etc., etc. But if you look at the distance from that place to the border of Belarus, I think it was about 150 kilometers or 200 kilometers. Now with a truck, you can easily do it in 3 hours. So refueling these vehicles, supplying them with fuel wasn't really a problem. And if you look at also at the range of the tanks and so on, how far they can go on to distance with a full tank, you will find they're usually about 500-600 kilometers. So in my opinion, there wasn't a reason to say that they were basically running out of fuel. But in any case, the narrative was that the Russian command was incompetent. They made a huge mistake, couldn't organize basic logistics, etc., etc., etc. And then later on, basically, the pro-Russian pundits said again, no. That column had a meaning to be in that position, and or that it was basically a feint, because once negotiations started and we finally reached the point of the last meeting in Turkey, there was some sort of agreement on the table, and one could argue, and in Russia withdrew that column sort of in good faith. But unfortunately, that's not the whole story. The column got stuck on a road 40 miles long for 1 week, and it wasn't attacked. Yes, it was protected by attack helicopters, but there was no Ukrainian response to that. And I call that pure luck. Maybe the Russians made a decision to intimidate Kiev. Maybe that was the reason. And if you are pro-Russians, you would have argued like that. But the column stayed there for a week. And after that week, according to satellite forces, it started to disperse and went into sort of attack positions. And I believe skirmishes did happen between the Ukrainians and the Russian columns. Now, I could present you with all different other credible explanations why this unit has got stuck. One doesn't have to look at, say, the fuel problem. The fuel problem could have been solved quite easily. But say the Russians sort of command forgot about to properly provide logistics in terms of ammunition and food and etc. like that. So if they want to, and if you want to think about this, how effective would it have been to have one column of 40 miles long, or standing for a week, or having one column of 40 miles long, traveling on the road, and then splitting into attack formations and create basically a front, you want to call it artificial front, and then started bombarding certain installations. Which of these situations is more intimidating? Which one would have a much bigger influence on the impact in terms of psychological effect on Kiev? Which one of these two scenarios would have been more successful in forcing the Kiev regime to the negotiation table? In my opinion, the latter. The column, yes, it is part of the psychological effect, but the final setup of an attack front line is much more intimidating. And I believe something went wrong in that column. Something went wrong in the Russian command, and which led to this 1 week stationary column. Just remember, it's 1 week. It's not 2 days, it's 1 week. And I believe that, well, like I said, credible alternative is that the Russian had some logistical problems, which they had to fix because maybe they were not prepared that should the artificially created front line get involved into a fight with Ukrainian forces, then they might have lacked certain items which General Command didn't provide for. Or they underestimated the reaction from Kiev by bringing up or throwing forces from the southern front and bringing up to protect Kiev. Maybe the speed was higher or whatever. But there's a reason for that, and the reason is not the feint. The feint was sort of a safe face action on the Russian part. Then it's also quite well known that the Russian command did make a lot of mistakes at the beginning. They lost some equipment and manpower in the initial phase. That cannot be disputed. That was even admitted, but they adapted to the situation. And then they started the war of attrition by deploying a lot of artillery pieces and slowly grinding the Ukrainian forces. So they did admit that they made mistakes. Well, also, you can argue about that, but at the end of the day, facts are facts. According to the Russian military defense, in one of his Sogoi said that the initial, they sent about 150, 200,000 men, and the Ukrainians had more or less also 200,000 soldiers available. So it was basically an even match in terms of manpower. Contrary to what we all have been, most of the commentators have said that, yes, the Russians are outnumbered. No, they were not that outnumbered at the beginning. So it was a fair decision. They sent limited military personnel, and as I explained many times in my previous videos, one has to look at the aim of the SMO. The SMO was, while Putin basically recognized the republics, the Donbass two republics, as independent countries, they asked for assistance, military assistance, and Russia provided military assistance, which means the Donbass republics were in command, the Russians were in support. That is how the whole thing started. If it was any other way, it would have been a violation of international law. But shaping it as an assistance operation was all fair, and according to international law. And that is how the whole operation was controlled and how it was managed. And then we all know, we know Kherson and Zaporizhzhia areas were initially occupied with very little resistance. And the Russians, well, in that respect, unfortunately, in my opinion, broke international law because they attacked Ukraine directly and not as an assistance to the Donbass republics. But we can argue about that point. It will probably be written up in history, in the history books. So now the Russians occupy Kherson, and they occupied a certain part of Zaporizhzhia Oblast, but not Zaporizhzhia city itself, which in my opinion was a huge mistake. And it was also, in my opinion, a huge mistake from the Russians not to proceed beyond Kherson and occupy the complete Kherson Oblast. Why they didn't do it, I don't know. Maybe the Ukrainian defense was set up that they made some huge defensive lines just outside Kherson so that the Russians couldn't advance anymore beyond Kherson. And maybe they set up the defense systems line so that the Russians couldn't occupy Zaporizhzhia. But I cannot find any information about that, even if I look for it. So unless it is in the Russians, which I can't read, then that's it, too bad. Maybe somebody else can make a little bit sense of that. But for me, it was a mistake not to proceed beyond Kherson and ensure that Kherson city is safe, or that Zaporizhzhia city has been occupied. Because at the end of the day, you talk about oblast. You look at the original borders, and that is what you want to achieve. That was the initial objective in any case of the Donbass two republics. So why not go further? But it didn't happen. And then everything started going on, and we proceeded with the military operation, and we had Mariupol, and and so we can talk about that, and then suddenly something happened. In the meantime, the Ukrainians have increased their forces to about 700,000 men. Now, it was widely known that they have accumulated this type of forces. We also widely known that the forces were being trained in Western countries. It was also known that a lot of NATO weapons were coming in, and that the people, the Ukrainian soldiers, were trained on that. And we all expected sort of a counter-offensive, which I don't agree with. I basically stated this an offensive. Counter-offensive is more than like a dynamic reaction to an attack, to an offense. But in any case, that's a, I call it semantics. Doesn't really matter how we define it. We can all speak more or less the same language, but we sometimes have different definitions for the same principles of wording. But in any case, that's not the point. The point is, the Ukrainians attacked Kherson area, and they were repelled every single time. Russia removed people soldiers from other areas, and moved them to Kherson in order to reinforce the defensive lines. And by that, certain other areas of Ukraine from the contact line has become depopulated in terms of soldiers and equipment. And the Ukrainians amassed a certain amount of troops in the northern part, just below Kharkiv, and then they attacked. And they attacked Isium, and then Balaklaya or something. These names are bad. In any case, so, and suddenly the Russians were in retreat. And again, pro-Russian punters try to provide excuses for this, and why sacrifice people's lives, soldiers' lives? Why it's better to fight another day, and it's all planned, and the Russians took care of it, and they're going to move up a retreat until up to a certain level, a river. I think it's not the Olga, but something Ofka or so. Yeah, these names are very difficult. But in any case, they were supposed to retreat until right to prepared defensive lines. And the pro-Western people, pro-Ukrainian people said it's huge victories for the Ukrainian army, and they were showing it, and so forth and so forth. More than nice propaganda. And then what did happen? The Russians retreated, set up a defensive line, wasn't prepared, retreated again, and retreated again. And if you look now at the map, they have retreated a lot more than they initially planned. And one has to give credit where credit is due. For me, that whole offensive was a total failure in terms of Russian intelligence. The Russians should have noticed the accumulation of forces in the Isium area. They should have prepared for that in terms of their mobile capability. They should have prepared proper defensive lines when the Russians have retreated. But most importantly, they should have mobilized troops a long time ago. As soon as the news came in that that the Ukrainians were increasing their forces to 700,000 men, the Russians should have reacted already and mobilized the 300,000 reserves. What we are seeing now is that the 300,000 reserves have been called up, but way too late. The Ukrainians forces have moved and drove back the Russian forces and the Donbass forces, but let's call them all the Russian forces. We know what's happening there. And they drove them back significantly to the east. And then they basically attacked Lyman. And that was also a disaster, and the Russians had to retreat from that as well. And even some of what's that Chechen leader, Kadyrov, he was complaining that the Russian command didn't know what they were doing. And that was supported by the leader of the Wagner groups. So something went wrong. And nobody wants to admit it. Got to give credit where credit is due. And, well, then stuff started to stabilize on the front. I think Putin said that more, I think 45,000 troops have now been sent, of these reserves has been sent now to the front. I believe at this stage probably a little bit more, maybe 80,000 or so. So the soldiers and the Russian troop concentrations have been increased significantly. The question is where. I still don't know where they are being stationed, because that information is highly confidential and there are no sources that actually describe it. Russian sources. We know where the Ukrainian forces are, but we're not sure where the Russian forces are. And then basically, well, that is the turning point, and and we had, in the meantime, together with the mobilization, we saw a change in the status of the two Donbas republics and then the two Ukrainian oblasts of Kherson and Zaporizhzhia. They were now incorporated into Russia, and now they have become Russian territory. And then we had other stuff like the sabotage, and we all know what's more or less happening there. And if you don't know, there are multiple videos that I've made. You can look at it, and you can look also at different other commentators. Get an updated picture. But that's not what I want to talk about. And then, recently, well, sorry, yeah, okay. Apparently, the Russians were grinding down the Ukrainian forces. Ukrainians start attacking the Russian forces. They suffered severe losses, and etc. and etc. But, well, if you attack, you lose men. That is, unfortunately, the tragedy of attacking another defensive line. Make no mistake about that. And losing 100 men a day is not critical. If you attack with 3,000 men and you lose 100 men, not all of them are dead. Some of them are injured in any case. So what is defined as heavy losses in any case? That's a relative concept. But this was, I had to go back a little bit. And then this week came out the disaster in Pavlovka. What the hell went wrong there? Russians lost 300 men, 59 killed, and the rest were wounded. It was so bad that the Russian soldiers wrote back to the Russian command and say, listen here, this must be investigated. We are being slaughtered here. For what? For nothing. For nothing. In the middle of nowhere, in the mud where the rain season has started. Cold hasn't been yet. The reinforcement hasn't arrived yet. What the hell did these generals think of? In my opinion, they should be stripped of their ranks and put on the front line. Because if you listen to the military strategic website, he presents a theory that these type of generals are now in competition with other generals, and they want to shine, and they want to obtain medals on the back of the blood of their own soldiers. That's why I said, these guys must be stripped of their ranks and put on the front line. And then yesterday, we've heard that the Russians are evacuating or withdrawing from Kherson. Again, what the hell? You can talk as much as you want about protecting civilians, and you can talk as much as you want about saving the soldiers' lives. They're going to be encircled. They're going to be, the dam is going to be blown up. People are going to die. You can talk as much and make as much excuses as you want. But if you look from a strategic point of view, this is a huge military blunder. Now, I've also said many times in my previous videos, battles can be determined beforehand what the outcome would be. You look at the men, you look at their training, you look at the weapons available, and unless somebody makes an unconventional decision, you know which side will win. That's it. And maybe that is the simple calculations that the Russian commanders made. The question is, why didn't they try to do as what actually had happened here? Is this the same what the Ukrainians have done with the Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant? They have threatened pause. They have threatened catastrophic scenarios. But they haven't done it. They have how many weeks did they bomb the Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant? 4 weeks. Was it destroyed? No. Because they know what the consequences will be of destroying a nuclear plant. Why are we always talking about that the Ukrainians and the Ukrainian commands are stupid idiots? They are not stupid idiots. They are men just like you and me. Same type of people. We are just on the different sides of the line. In any case, they didn't destroy the Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant. They bombed it. Yes, sometimes the plant itself was damaged, but most of the times it was a city nearby that was attacked, which wasn't always made clear in the briefings or articles. And now we have this, what is this dam called? Kakhovka Reservoir. Now this has been bombed by the Ukrainians for 4 weeks. And it still hasn't been damaged. The wall hasn't broken, but it has been attacked by 4 weeks. Then we hear that the Russians are evacuating the civilians from Kherson, and then a column of civilians are attacked by precision ammunition. Please note the word precision ammunition. Whether it's a 155 precision round, the Excalibur, or whether it was a HIMARS or whatever, it was a precision ammunition, and they killed a number of civilians that were evacuating Kherson. Which means they have the capability of doing precision strikes. So if they wanted to destroy the dam wall or the Kakhovka Reservoir, they could have done it a long time ago. Because they have precision ammunition. But they didn't do it. Why? Because it would have been catastrophic, and from a PR point of view, Ukraine would have lost a lot of support in the Western countries. And then basically weapons would have dried up, support would have dried up. They also cannot afford this catastrophic situation like that. But they threatened, and Russia reacted and withdrew their troops. Save the soldiers, save the civilians. And what did they do? According to the amount of people, what I understand is that they withdrew about 110,000 civilians from Kherson, but there are 280,000 people in Kherson. So what happens to the rest? Number one. And now to remember, they are now Russian citizens. They are not Ukrainian citizens anymore. Very important. And then the Russians say, yes, but if the dam is broken, a lot of soldiers will be sort of encircled with a back out against the floods, and civilian people will die in the towns. Well, what happened to the people in those towns? Why not evacuate them? Have they done that? I can get no information about that. And then I think 2 days ago, I read an article about the prediction that the temperature will drop on the 15th of November or 14th of November to about 1 degree Celsius or even less. That means the freezing season is here. And how many days is it from? 5 days? 4 days? 5 days? 6 days? And then the month is gone. So I give it another 2 weeks. And then we have maybe frozen ground. Again, doing the radical decision, like I always said, why didn't the Russians threaten Ukraine and make it known to the Western world and to the American backers that if that dam is broken, Russia will carpet bomb Kiev? Why didn't they do that? Why didn't they threaten back with severe consequences? Because when the Ukrainians, the sabotage attack against the Crimean Bridge and the Russian Black Sea Fleet, there were huge retaliations in terms of missile attacks, and now we have 30 or 40% of the Ukrainian power grid being blown up and not working. That was a message. Did the Kiev regime get it? I'm sure they got it. And then threatening the total destruction of Kiev by bombers. For what? For breaking a dam wall? Who would risk that? So the point is, threaten Kiev back. And you could have prevented it. Again, they've been bombing it for a week, 4 weeks already, the dam. They didn't break it. They had precision ammunition available. They could have blown it up. They didn't. They could have been scared back and threatened themselves, but the Russians decided not to do it. They rather decided to withdraw from Kherson. And what does that mean actually in terms of military strategic value? Firstly, it's a huge demoralizing action. Doesn't matter how you look at it. It's a PR disaster worldwide. Number 2. Number 3 is you lose the trust of the people in the Kherson Oblast and the Zaporizhzhia Oblast and any future Ukrainian Oblast that wants to join Russia in the future, like Odessa. They will not trust the Russians when they arrive because they know the Russians will might retrieve and leave them to the mercy of the Ukrainians. Number 4 is, once you abandon, you have evacuated more or less half of the population at this stage from Kherson. Why only half of it? What's going to happen to the rest of them? So you're sacrificing Russian civilians now to the enemy. Bad PR, bad morale, bad in every aspect you look at it. And then, where was it, number 4, 5? So what's going to happen is now that the Ukrainian force is going to enter Kherson, they're going to fortify Kherson, the Russians have to take it back because that is their duty, according to the constitution. They have to recover Russian territory, and they will have to attack Kherson, and then Kherson will be destroyed as a city in a similar way that Mariupol has been destroyed. And it will cost you manpower to do that, casualties. For Russian soldiers will die in retaking Kherson. Just remember what I always said, when you have defensive lines and you attack, you're going to lose soldiers. That is the 1+1 rule in military conflicts. If you attack, you lose manpower. So if you haven't lost them by the supposed to be dam-breaking flood type of scenario, if you haven't, you would have lost soldiers there, but you would have used soldiers in any case by retaking Kherson. So what's the point? Why didn't they make plans to? What I can't understand is that the Russians have absolute military superiority. They have more than enough artillery pieces. They have long-range missile systems. They have fighter, they have bombers. They have strategic bombers. They have cruise missiles. They have, what the hell you want to call them? So when the Ukrainians attack and push the Russian soldiers on the west side of the river, with backwards to the front, or with their backs against the river, the Russian command can do nothing. 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 Come on, people. Why don't they send in the bombers up there? What do you call it? TUs? I don't know the numbers. 52s and annihilate the Ukrainian army. No, we retreat. I don't know. Doesn't look good for me. You know, before this war started, again, this friend of mine, and I have actually mentioned it in a previous video, he said to me the Russians are prepared to put 10,000 soldiers on that chessboard. And they are prepared to sacrifice each one of their lives. And then they would tell the NATO people, put 10,000 soldiers on that chessboard and let's fight. But the Western NATO people cannot afford casualties. But the Russians accept casualties as being part of the war. Now I have to question that narrative. I don't see any honor in the actions of the military. I do not see any commitment. I see weakness. That is how I see it. And weakness will be exploited by the West. So I'm sorry. You can defend the Russian forces as much as you want, but like you have to give credit where credit is due, you have to give blame where blame is due. In any case, that's my story for today. Please subscribe to the channel. Tell your friends, spread the word, and until next time, cheers.